Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. My name's Andy Libson. Again, today we're joined by Kenny Zepeda and Jessica. We are online at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episodes and jot down our information wherever you found this episode. And as you can see, today we are joined by a regular contributor to What's Left, John Klyczek, who I usually call Jake, so don't get confused if some people say John, some people say Jake. But John Klyczek is the author of School World Order, Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education, and is a frequent contributor to Unlimited Hangout. And today we're going to be talking about one of his articles. Before I talk about that article, or his most recent article for Unlimited Hangout, I want to welcome you here, Jake.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's been a little while, right?
It has been a little while. Mm-hmm. And we're hoping that we can maybe have you on almost like a monthly basis.
Yeah. That's probably more doable. I've been, sort of overloaded and trying to juggle everything. So weekly became a little difficult. So yeah, let's try for monthly.
Right.
I haven't said hi, so hey, good to see you.
Hey.
You're doing good. I'm glad to see you here again. It's enjoyable.
Yeah, good to see you. Yes, sir.
Okay. So today we're going to discuss one of Jake's recent articles. And as you can see here, it's entitled Marx Hubbard, Godmother of Transhumanism and Synthetic Spirituality. The late Barbara Hubbard, a Rockefeller-funded New Age guru, was critical to the development of the ideas, beliefs, and technology necessary to market transhumanism as spiritual enlightenment. And I want to read the first two paragraphs because I think Jake does a pretty good job summarizing at least most of this article. I think people who are listening, I hope they read this article and see what, we're going to discuss it. But here's kind of what the background is to this, which is in 2016, the Global Future Councils of the World Economic Forum posted a video entitled 8 Predictions for the World in 2030, which infamously forecasted a technocratic new world order in which you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. It doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to ponder how WEF oligarchs plan to roll out sustainable development policies which will ration consumer goods in a global sharing economy that employs transient gig workers who will be rendered into propertyless serfs under a techno-communitarian rendition of neo-feudalism. But how will the globalist technocrats of the WEF sway the virtual peasant class to be happy with their permanent state of digitally indentured servitude? First off, Jake, that is a great summary of what is going on. So I think that's a perfect paragraph for some of the things that worry us. But here's the next part he talks about. Enter New Age guru Marx Hubbard and her endorsement of the Heart Math Institute Global Coherence Initiative, which is propagating transhumanist neurofeedback variables across the planet in order to digitally synchronize humanity's collective heart rhythms and brainwaves into electronically induced states of synthetic spiritual bliss. With Hubbard's transhumanist blessings, HeartMath's global neurotech network is primed to lull plebs and proles into happy compliance with the new normal of the Fourth Industrial Revolution's techno-feudal stakeholder economy. So that's a lot of stuff there, Jake. First of all, is there anything else you'd like to say just about the article? Maybe first of all, why you thought it was important to write, and then any more background that you think is important.
Well, I wrote it just because I guess I kind of wanted to take a break from education technology stuff. And so I asked Whitney if she wanted me to maybe switch it up a little bit. And did she have maybe a topic something that she would like covered? And so she sent me some quotes from Marx Hubbard, one of which is not in there, but it's a radically Malthusian quote. Has something to do with something to the effect of, as we shift our consciousness into the new age, that we'll need to get rid of a very large portion of people. And she had sort of mentioned that she was connected to some of the people that I'd already written about and researched about. So she's a person that's she being Hubbard is a person that's Rockefeller funded, and is basically a transhumanist. And so it dovetailed with a lot of my other research. And my book covers Skull and Bones and some of the occult nature of sort of the secret society influence on the development of transhumanism. So, in terms of her new age kind of, which you might call a cult sort of spirituality, that sort of dovetail with it as well. So that's just sort of the background on it. Is there anything else in terms of context? No, I think we could just kind of roll with it from here.
What I want to start with is actually, Jessica, if you want to start, or Kenny, you want to start. I think we all read the article. What were some impressions or thoughts you had of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to see the connections, of people, because like on the surface, someone like Barbara sounds like a kooky person, like for an outsider, a fringe person, right? That's what we will use as in modern terms. But then, the more I read the article, I started seeing the connections when you bring the Rockefellers in it, and then like how that web just expands, and in this worldview, it's not just a fringe thing. It actually is very much part of the like the ecosystem that makes and runs the world, dictates the world, and so again, that was the biggest thing takeaway, like how much bigger of an influence it has than a fringe group. It is actually very well and alive in people who shape society, like the Rockefellers, and so that was the biggest takeaway for me.
Yeah, I mean, along those lines, I was thinking a lot throughout this about, just sort of how I feel in terms of like, okay, like how much actual influence does this person really have in the world? Like who's listening to her? Because I mean, obviously 95% of the stuff that she says is batshit crazy, but then like Jake illuminates all of this, Rockefeller funding and all of the connections and just like the people that she's hanging around with and having, both, personal and business relationships. I think that like just hearing you reread the first paragraph, Andy, that last question, how will the globalist technocrats at the WEF sway the virtual peasant class to be happy with their, their servitude? I think, I just hearing that again, it comes back to that idea of consent, and like they do on some level like require the consent of the public to carry out, like whether it's this crazy like planetary transhumanist dystopia or if it's something smaller and like some of the destructive policies we've seen the past few years. So I guess, I was just kind of thinking a lot about what does it mean to like be able to influence a population. And I also was just thinking like, how do these people get to be the way that they are? That's another just question on my mind. Because it's like every one of these elite ruling class technocrats or transhumanists or CEOs or whatever, it's like you start digging into them and I mean all of them, like they're just straight eugenicists, just really like something's wrong with them. And so I was just kind of thinking a lot about like just human psychology and and obviously they're thinking a lot about human psychology too in terms of how to exploit it and manipulate it. And and then I kind of segueing from last week. Like last week, I think I was kind of spinning out over a lot of the like ritualistic aspects of the stuff that Allison was talking about, and just these like spiritual like inversions or perversions, and just how pervasive that is, like so much more than I ever would have thought a couple of years ago. It's just like they're all like, whether it's a cult or spirituality or it seems like just really pervasive. So yeah, those are a couple of scattered impressions.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I also want to hear like either Jake or anybody, like, can someone define New Age? Because like, I mean, I've been called New Age like by people in the past, and it's just like, I don't know, she's kind of like this, mascot or whatever for the New Age movement. But I'm curious, like, are there other kind of sectors of that, or like, I would like to kind of have a clearer definition of that.
Well, yeah. So let me just so New Age is kind of a vague term that's hard to pin down, right? Because you can sort of identify maybe primarily as almost any one of the world's religion and be sort of New Age in your sort of interpretation. I guess the best way to define it in as much as it's possible to, sort of encapsulate it in something that's cohesive, would be, it's basically what's called a syncretic or a syncretist approach to sort of synthesizing all the world religions. So syncretism was what the Romans would do when they would go in. They would, encounter a new culture, and they'd have their battles and conquer it or whatever, and they'd be like, oh, they got a god of war as well. So they call it whatever, but we'll just say that it's the same thing. Whether it's the Greek Ares or the Roman Mars, or whatever the Vedics had for the same, and then how it relates to the planets. They just sort of said, well, we're talking about the same thing, we're using different names. So that's one way to sort of define it. But I would also say that there's sort of what I might call the Gnosticism. So in other words, some of the tenets of Gnosticism is that there's a heavy emphasis on secret knowledge. There's an emphasis on this world being sort of a prison to escape from. And then there's sort of an emphasis on this achieving some higher consciousness or higher vibration. Sometimes they refer to it as becoming an ascended master. And so that's where, if you're a Christian, you become the ascended master, you achieve Christ consciousness. If you come from a Buddhist bent, then you become the fifth Buddha, and they have their own little sort of messiah named Maitreya is one that's like New Age proper. But I know I just threw a bunch of stuff around, but so if I can synthesize it, basically it's sort of this, it's a spiritual sort of milieu that sort of tries to combine all the world's religions, and the way that you practice it is by trying to achieve some higher ascendant consciousness by breaking out of the prison of the material world through secret knowledge. And when we talk about secret knowledge now, this is the definition of a cult, right? A cult is actually a term that refers to, right, the phases of the moon, which just means when it's occulted, it's hidden. So if it's hidden, it's secret, okay, et cetera. And a lot of it traces back to like something called theosophy. And if you look at some of the tributaries of theosophy, we're also getting into some of the mystery schools, the ancient mystery schools, some of which are sort of combined into Masonic spirituality as well. I don't know that I made that any clearer in terms of the definition, but I at least identified some elements that make something New Age, right? But somebody could be, you could come at it from all these different angles, and you could look very different in your approach to it, I guess, if that makes sense.
It almost sounds to me that, it's like a relationship of the old, worldviews and understanding, and modernity, in some way, or like an actualization of, the old stuff. And yeah, that's at least what sense I get.
Yeah, and to sort of emphasize, like, okay, so in terms of how you'd come at it from different angles, like maybe some New Age type people might want to try to achieve this higher vibration through psychedelics. Another might just be like meditation. Another might want to practice ritual magic. Another one might, just need to go to some like human potential seminars and, through Maslow's psychology of self-actualization, right? Another might, go through some approach of like, asceticism, or like denying yourself, right? Like fasting and things like that, right? So all these, it could be, especially if you just want to focus on one of those, right? You might look like you're practicing different things, but you're trying to get to, right? Basically, it's sort of this old world sort of spiritual higher consciousness, and so that's yeah. One more thing I might note is that, and I had a lot of people that like were Gnostic and maybe New Age that they didn't like that I sort of, I guess they argue that I overconflated Gnosticism generally with Barbara Marx Hubbard's sort of interpretation of it and how it relates to transhumanism. And there was a lot of New Agers and a lot of Gnostic people that argued that we're against transhumanism in the sense that we're against merging with technology. They're not against reaching the higher consciousness. They just don't want to use technology to do it. Whereas I guess another branch of this New Age thing would be, instead of using psychedelics or meditation or magic or whatever, you would use technology. And there, I guess there's at least a group or groups of New Agers that reject that as an approach.
So she's not really like co-opting or like perverting the New Age movement. Like she really like does represent it in your view.
I mean that's at the bottom line, like I guess I would, another way to say that is, maybe you might approach it in a very similar way, or you like a lot of what she says as a New Age person, and you might see in some of her rhetoric good intentions, and you might have good intentions yourself. But I would argue that if you follow that path, like it's where it goes, and then it's really the only argument that I'm receiving is that whether or not technology should be part of it, right? But I mean, in one way or another, the end game, the end idea is that what we are now as human beings needs to be over. There needs to be a new age of new humans, right? And whether you want to call those transhumans that are cyborgs or some other sort of, we just have a higher consciousness and that makes us behave differently somehow, whatever that means, you're still on, to use Hubbard's language, you're still on an evolutionary sort of trajectory, right? And so, I would say that, yeah, I mean, and if you just look at, the institutions that she was connected to, who promoted her, some of her, mentors, she was connected to, a lot of, some of the most prominent New Age people, and they all, if you just dig around enough and you just do the research, you'll come around to these circles over and over again. They're all talking the same stuff, right? I mean, the only difference might be, again, to what extent do you want to emphasize technology? But that's, yeah, I would say yes, that she represents the New Age, and that's where it goes. Whether you have good intentions for it or not, that's my assessment. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in some ways, I think that bringing up the New Age is actually where I was going to start, because I've never really, all the trouble I've had with liberals thinking that they're arrogant and fake, I often put on people who just call themselves New Age. And I'm not saying that because it's true. I'm just saying that's where I come from. Like I've always had this suspicion of these people being behind the scenes arrogant and fake. And also that in some ways, even like I'm not Christian, but I respected Christianity and Christians for committing to their beliefs. And I always took New Age people as sort of like faux religion, like not quite committing, in the same way that a person would be like, you could practice Muay Thai and you're fighting, or a person is like, I'm going to take Tai Bo classes in a gym, and I would say that person is like, I might have a judgment on that person. And I'm not saying that when people hear this, people should not be judging that person, judge me, because that's just where I'm coming from. It's like, I've always had this kind of skepticism about these people and a kind of a distrust. So this article is perfect for me to read because
I've only ever heard New Age outside the internet. I mean, like in person. I've only ever heard it as a dig, as like, oh, you're being so new agey. Like,
yeah. And in reality, though, I will say that I have done some things. Like I've gone to workshops that are new, like me and Brandy did, like early in our relationship, where I was like, all right, there was something here. Like I had to overcome some of my biases, but if I overcame those, I could have an experience that I thought was meaningful and left me with kind of like, oh, I remember having one workshop where I came away from it like, you know what? Instead of thinking about Sunday really being Monday early, why don't I just think of Sunday as being Sunday, like a day off? And that actually helped me, like, so that was one thing that came of it. But I will say what I really appreciated about this article was like, I don't know who Barbara Marx Hubbard was, but I know who Albert Maslow is. And that name has been coming up a lot when we were talking to Allison. So he's kind of connected to her. And then I've heard of Buckminster Fuller, and his notion of a kind of a structured science, and even that the buckyball itself very much reminds me of the kind of networks that I've seen constructed around the world that are going to be kind of internet networks. And then to also know that this guy, when I read her obituary and find out this guy, there's this one dude who was reading or was giving saying, hey, she was a great person and we're sorry that she's gone now. She died in 2019, but she was friends with Albert Maslow, with Buckminster Fuller and Jonas Salk. And it immediately reminded me when I heard about her as being like really close to him, our Diego Rivera episode, where it's like, oh my gosh, why is Diego Rivera so interested in the vaccination process? And like, why is she connected to him? And then that led me down the road of like, okay, Jonas Salk writing about, what's the name of his book? The
Survival of the Wisest.
Survival of the Wisest and Conscious Evolution, which is like, how do we consciously construct the human world to make it evolutionary? And to hear her write her own writings, her own words, be the same one that this is how Buckminster Fuller talked. This is how at least Maslow seems to talk, which is each of them identified them as the new age, as that new age of type person, as being that new ascendant kind of person, if they can just take these folks forward. And it's very troubling, honestly, to listen to these folks talk. And then to know that when I heard that story about her connected with the Vax guy, Jonas Salk, when she met Jonas Salk, she met him with this guy named, Jason, hold on, I get this name right. Jason Broniewski. And Jason Broniewski was one of the early people to make the case to FDR about needing to do the research into the bomb, into energy of the bomb. And he himself was hired by the British to do studies on the impact of that bomb. Once it was done on the Japanese, he did this long secret study about how the radiation from that messed those people up. It was just for the British government. And it's like, what is she doing with all these people? And it is troubling. And it is like, and so I just appreciated kind of, for me, seeing how this ruling class ideology could work. And I still tend to think of it as a ruling class fever dream. Like this is their dream of where they want to get to, but I do believe they intend to do this. And the last thing I want to read is that thing that you printed from Heart Mind. Like this, or Heart Math. Heart Math is a program to socially synchronize an individual's heart coherence with the global community by uploading users' electrocardiogram analytics to online cloud databases. HeartMath's biofeedback technologies are being propagated across the planet through HMI's Global Coherence Initiative in order to harmonize the world's ECG wavelengths into a singular hive mind resonance. And this other person, basically, what did she say? HeartMath, this woman, Rachel Weiss, I think her name was, HeartMath has demonstrated that we can intentionally change our heart signal pattern to a coherent waveform in which heart-brain alignment is created, causing a favorable cascade of neural, hormonal, and biochemical changes as systems synchronize and connect, facilitating a system-wide communication. And in fact, they're doing this now at places like Esalen, or that guy Mickey Ziegler.
I think it's Siegel, Mikey Siegel.
Mikey Siegel is like doing that at Esalen now, having these heart, brain synchronized experiences up in Esalen, which is supposed to be a place to get closer to like spirituality in that new agey way, but apparently they're strapping these people on with neuro bands around their heads. And then they've actually had this idea. This person said, if we could get 350,000 people checked into this thing, then we think we could actually move history forward. And I was like thinking about that. It's like, that's a very small number when you talk about 7.5 billion. Like you folks have a plan in mind of only taking a small group of people, coordinating them, and seeing if you can run the world with it. It's like, again, I don't know how. It's like anyway, it was very disturbing, but also I was glad to read it, because at first I was like, why am I reading about Barbara Marx Hubbard? But it's really about reading about these ideological tentacles that are both in the ruling class in my mind, and they're trying to bring into us as they bring us into this new world.
So Hubbard, she's promoting the Heart Math Institute, which is connected to something called Heart Math Inc. So there's like a for-profit branch, and then there's a nonprofit branch. And the nonprofit branch has this thing called the Global Coherence Initiative. And what you use to be part of this Global Coherence Initiative are these, they basically read your heart rhythm. So they're electrocardiograms. And there's one that's called M-Wave, and there's another one that's called Inner Balance. Now, interestingly, M-Wave is mentioned in my book. And actually, in part of this article, I mentioned that M-Wave has been used for educational workshops. So you use this heart monitor to maybe give the students like a mindfulness meditation or something to get them to sort of calm down. Maybe if they have test anxiety or something like that, but it's to get them into sort of a biorhythmic sort of subconscious emotional state where their frontal cortex will not be impeded by whatever negative sort of anxieties and irregular heart rates they might be dealing with. And then actually it's, I note in there as well, which is sort of the tie into the book, was that, this fits into all the socio-emotional biofeedback wearables I've talked about numerous times on this show and in the book. And also that Betsy DeVos, former Secretary of Ed, that she was on the board of something called NeuroCore, which was using EEGs instead of ECGs. So you can do biofeedback in terms of brain waves, you can do it in terms of heart rate. And the reason I mention that is because Betsy DeVos, by marriage, is the heir to the Dick DeVos Amway fortune. And Amway is a multi-level marketing corporation. And multi-level marketing and human potential movement basically go together. And so the human potential movement gets us back to the Maslowian sort of psychology that's used to get people motivated into participating, usually in corporate culture. Okay. And so heart math itself is basically an MLM. So the scheme for MLM is that, MLM being multi-level marketing, basically, so you have a product, okay, and then you're going to recruit like coaches or salespeople that are going to sort of be the foot soldiers for the company to distribute the products, to build clientele, but also maybe to build more coaches and more salespeople. Okay, and they're usually referred to as like a pyramid scheme, because the way that works is eventually, right, the first couple layers, right, they're getting all these new coaches and then they're buying the product from them. But at the end of that pyramid, somebody's left with a bag of products that they usually can't sell, okay? And the reason why Amway gets away with this is because there's actually a product to sell, but there's other schemes in which, sort of like the Bernie Madoff style schemes where, somebody's left with an empty bag and nothing to sell, right? I mean, it's basically just, bloated paper or, speculative stuff. So that's sort of the model for selling these products, and heart math uses that same idea. Okay, so you can become a heart math coach, and then you can sell the wearables, and you can lead people into these guided meditations. The funny thing is, the guided meditations that they use, they got names for all of them. I can't think of what they are right now, but they're all trademarked. So to say like this meditation, it's got like a TM or whatever it is, an R or a C. I think it's a TM. And it's like, in other words, technically, you're not supposed to be allowed to practice those meditations outside of your official status in a sanctioned, a setting that's, where heart math is somehow making more money or selling more products. But I digress a little bit there. So that's the scheme for how heart math uses the MLM. So the human potential movement, or the human potential sort of angle on it, is you're not just selling the product to make money, right? Like, think of your Tony Robbins type seminar or something, right? Like, you're going to be a better you, right? You're going to sort of reach a higher psychological state, right? So you are also the product, right? And so are these other people that the products are going down to, right? And you're sort of, there's sort of this, you kind of become the company, right? They like, oh, it's a family, and right, like, we're all sort of growing together in our, achieving it. Maslow would have called it, they're achieving self-actualization, right? So Maslow's, his humanistic psychology, he's basically the founder of humanistic psychology. And that's, so reaching what he called peak states and achieving what's called self-actualization. That's another sort of carrot that's built into the whole system, right? So one thing is, right, you're making money selling these products. They say, oh, you're an entrepreneur because you're your own boss, and then, but you're part of a family, and it's a corporate family, and you're also achieving a higher state of consciousness, and so that you can bring in the conscious evolution thing here. And so that's sort of how heart math as an institution works. And then the way that the Global Coherence Initiative works is that basically everybody puts on the wearable, okay, and it attaches to your phone, and it's got the ECGs there, and then you can upload it to an app on the TV. And on the TV, there's like a globe, and the globe's got little like light points, which is, very new agey, by the way, we're light and love. But anyways, so every light point on this map sort of indicates where other people are doing what you're doing. In other words, where other people are also participating in the group meditation. And so everybody is supposed to get their ECGs to the same wavelength, and they're all supposed to meditate on the same thing. And some people didn't like that. I probably should have used better verbs. It was a new topic. I could have been more precise, but I kind of euphemistically referred to it as sort of mesmerizing or hypnotizing, which maybe it's a little too euphemistic, right? What I would say is make you suggestible, right? And make you suggestible and sort of lull you into a less critical and less contentious, biorhythmic psychological state. Okay. And they're like, oh, it's not good. There's a lot of people. So I never got so many like criticisms or, let's just say contentious feedback from people all over various platforms. And not just people that were like Gnostic and didn't like how I characterized it, and not just people who actually knew Barbara Marx Hubbard and were very fond of her. But a lot of people that just used the heart math stuff and didn't fall into either of the other two categories. And they're like, oh, it doesn't do that. It just makes me, I'm able to check when I'm overly, frustrated or anxious, and then I can bring myself back to a state where I'm not operating from my limbic system and, sort of being unnecessarily aggressive. All right, that's fine. I'm not saying that couldn't be done, and I'm not saying that would be a bad thing. But when you use it in a group setting like that, I did some more research on it, just because I'm thinking that, right? If everybody's got their wearables on and we're watching, and let's say we're gonna meditate on whatever is the TV propaganda message for this month, right? That could sort of make you more compliant with whatever it might be. And so I'm thinking, right, lockdowns, new normal. Well, it's not in the article, but it's on my Telegram page if you want to see the post where I linked to it and quoted from it. But there was a global coherence. One of their meditations was last year, 2021, right when the first sort of sign of like when we were finally starting to see some sort of unlocking, I guess you might call it. And there was a global meditation. I think it was called something to the effect of patience for the new normal. and it's like it's summertime, and the spikes are sort of going down in terms of infection rates, and some businesses are starting to loosen up, and but we've got a responsibility to take care of each other. So don't just rush out there yet today or this month or this week, whatever it was. We're going to meditate to have more patience for the lockdowns, right? We're gonna meditate on sort of containing our urge to go outside and I guess be super spreaders, right? So literally, they use the heart map wearable in a global group meditation to get people to meditate on basically complying with lockdowns, and they use the term new normal. All right, so I mean, it literally does that. The most recent one they had was something about meditating on the whole Ukraine thing. So I imagine whatever is the next big thing in the news, just from every occasion here and there, check it out. Go to the Global Coherence Initiative and look at what are they meditating on. I would wager that based on what I've seen, it's whatever is the mainstream media's sort of new propaganda narrative.
Well, and what's really disturbing me is I'm hearing you describe this wearable is, I mean, obviously in and of itself, it's fucked up, but I feel like what you just described of like having a digital global meditation or some sort of like reflection or physical like activity like yoga or whatever, basically to support like a propaganda message. I feel like that happened. I mean, like I'm like a yogi and I'm into meditation and stuff like that. And I feel like, especially in the first year of all the lockdowns and everything, like people were literally organizing that. And maybe it wasn't as overt as like, we're going to meditate on like, you must stay home, stay safe. But like, it wasn't that far off. It was like, we're going to get through this together and we're going to use meditation as a tool to face these challenges. So I guess like a lot of this, like, especially as somebody who participates in stuff that's sort of like, I mean, I consider it like what I do is like the good thing. And like this whole new agey Hubbard thing it's just like a twisted perversion of it. But I don't know, like I'm kind of asking myself, okay, so like, say you're doing like a group meditation where you're all like chanting a mantra or something, right? And this is like organic, this is a grassroots, whatever, group of hippies. You are like syncopating your breath and your speech and probably your heartbeat and like all of this kind of stuff, or even in a yoga class, right? Like somebody's walking you through like, okay, breathe in, breathe out at this time, regulate it. And so I'm kind of just like asking myself, okay, so like what's the difference here? Is the difference just like the presence of technology? Is it the like surveillance therein? Is it the sort of longer whether it's like transhumanist or even just data mining? Is it like the exploitation factor? Is it just like the control aspect of it? I don't know. Like I'm like, okay, where's the line between like what I consider to be like a sacred practice that's like connected to embodiment, and then this other thing which is like totally the opposite, and that it's all about dissociation and like taking away people's self-autonomy. But the actual acts that they're describing, like they're not that dissimilar. Like it's really just the tech, I guess. I don't know. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I mean, as I'm listening to you talk, I think more about, which is why I sort of did a long circle back to the whole humanistic psychology and the human potential movement, because that is sort of I guess the I don't want to say the ideology, but maybe we could say that sort of the wearables and sort of the meditations are kind of like the hardware, but the humanistic positive psychology is sort of the software that goes with it. And it's important to note because, I've studied quite extensely, behavioral psychology and to a lesser extent, psychoanalytic, right? And, insofar as it's connected to, all the ed tech stuff. But one of the things that I realized by studying Maslow for this article is that his idea of positive humanistic psychology sort of arose out of the idea that basically all the academic laboratory psychology to that point had been basically about pathologizing. Right? It was all about like correcting something that was wrong with you, right? Whether it was psychoanalytic, trying to find out what sort of subconscious, problems you had that was conflicting with, the ego and all that, or whether it had to do with sort of, you had sort of these behavioral patterns that were sort of ingrained in you to respond to certain stimuli the wrong way, right? The way that's undesirable for, whoever's running the classroom or society at large. And so Maslow was kind of like, well, we need a psychology that focuses on like not just how do you pathologize, how do you diagnose, prescribe, and sort of fix all these problems with human beings, right? Because then all you're doing is, right, I mean, you're focusing all of your energy on it's basically it's entirely a negative perspective on humanity, right? I mean, like you could spend your time correcting stuff all day, but even Skinner had he didn't just focus on punishment, right? He focused on rewards, right? But then it's like, okay, you can't just focus on extrinsic or external rewards because, right, then you're still sort of like this automata. So he's like, well, we need to come up with a psychology that where we focus on sort of the better aspects of ourselves and something to sort of grow into, not something to grow out of. And to sort of loop back to what you're saying is that sort of he's not. And by the way, he also calls it transpersonal, and literally he calls it transhuman psychology in Toward a Psychology of Being in the second edition. I think it's a foreword or preface. Okay, but he doesn't have like sort of these objective like values of what like humans should aspire to achieve this human potential, right? Like it's so. In other words, it's very easy to associate some form of psychological or spiritual growth with, right, some sort of corporate propaganda or some sort of government initiative, right? And so then what happens is, so where you're talking about like, where is the line? I think some of it's not necessarily in, as I just talked about with the wearable, like, okay, if you want to make sure you're not getting irritated, although, I don't think it's that hard to feel your heart beating on its own to know that you're like frustrated, right? But if you need the wearable to check yourself so you don't start, snapping on people, okay, that's fine, all right? And if you want to do some deep breathing meditation to sort of cool yourself off or whatever, that's fine, right? But when you start sort of associating those ECGs and this sort of, this mindfulness state with like tapping into some other value system that's being given to you from, whether it be the Great Reset or, the new normal or whatever, like this is where I think it sort of it can be steered in ways that we might not like, whether it be full-blown transhumanism or, just some other sort of corporate government initiative that, doesn't have your human potential in mind, right? It has sort of an institutional potential or some broader collective potential that, that you didn't have a say in sort of formulating to begin with, right? And like, so just as another example, Mikey Siegel, he's developing, I think it's called Heart Sync, basically the same thing as Heart Math. And one of his buddies who helped him to develop it, he said that, well, these could be great for like board meetings at a company, right? Like everybody can like get in their heart coherence and then we'll all be like on the same wavelength. Okay, that could be good, but what if the decision, so we're having a board meeting and the CEO or the president or somebody's like, yeah, we're going to do something where we fire half the people or we cut wages or we build a product that's, wholly unethical or, right, something that some of our board members might be like, yeah, I'm going to vote no on that, right? Like,
Yeah, they give it to the Supreme Court.
Well, they give you the wearable in the boardroom scenario, and then the people that were like inclined to, argue, and to say no. Right? Well, no, you want to be part of the team, and you want us, you want to be part of this mindful state, and maybe you feel like a better person because you're, helping the company team, and you're being buddies with all your coworkers, and so, it's sort of a roundabout way to say that, I think the line there is kind of, I think it has more to do with maybe the values that are associated with whether it's the technology or meditation or some form of a psychology retreat where you're just trying to get in tune with your own what's going on in there. So
it makes me think of when we talked about technology and health, right? And how you the more you need devices to tell you if you're healthy, the less control of your health you have, you give up. And so this to me, like, at least I see the parallel of like the spiritual, the philosophical, the mystical elements of being human, being experiencing life. It's the same process that's happening in that realm that's happening in physical health, right? And so, like, and it's still about power, whether you have it yourself or someone else, is gaining more control of your life. And so, like, I don't see much of a difference in that realm, in the people who, that's what I see here, that in this, and obviously the mind is powerful, belief systems are powerful. And so I guess I will follow up with a question, about the people who bankroll this stuff. But right now, like, this is the pattern that I see. It's not, it's again, and it's also connected, right? Your well-being is connected to how you think and how, and then your body manifests, things. And so these people who are telling us, connecting us to these devices to meditate, fundamentally, there is something that we all know. Like, if you're overstimulated, you need to calm the fuck down, and like, but they're obviously becoming mediators of you calming down, and you having control, some sort of sense of control and awareness of yourself. But they're the mediators. They're the ones who have the magic pill for you, and so, like, I do think, people like Barbara, like, they believe, like, they do think, they develop these things, but they're in a way useful, for creating this new world, right? That's coming our way.
Yeah, I think like that. You might be able to, for somebody that's maybe not in tune with their body to begin with, maybe like having an external metric might be able to go, oh, so when this is like this, that's it. I notice this feeling I'm having, and then eventually, do away with the wearable, and maybe, but maybe now that you have a sense of your own, heart rate and stuff like that, but like you said, if you're constantly, if that's your only awareness of what's going on inside you is through the metrics on the machine, right? I mean, that's not really making you in tune with yourself, right? And to sort of just go back to the point were you gonna jump in? Oh, I thought you. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. And then to go back to sort of what I was sort of suggesting before, like to what Jessica was talking about, that's like, even like, when me and my wife would go to, sometimes we go to a new church or something, and they're singing the hymns, and there's a lot of Christian churches that are new agey, right? And so, like, you'd be singing. She's like, why aren't you singing? I'm like, I got to read these words before I sing them. I don't know what we're all singing about. I don't know what kind of church this is. Like, I'm not familiar with it yet. I mean, like, it seems pretty traditional, but like, I don't know what kind of new agey, charismatic type stuff is, and I was always like that. Like, I never, like, where everybody in the crowd throw your hands up. It was just something was always like, why? Like, I don't want to just do something just because you said and everybody else is doing it. That's not a reason to do it. And so you sort of lose, I mean, through that process, I think you can easily lose your identity in that, and you sort of become the group, or you become the in this together slogan, or, whatever it is that's the whole, what's the group meditation, or what's the board meeting focused on, or whatever, which is not your human potential.
And it just like as the last thought, like it reminds me also of this idea of synchronicity, right? That is it's present in nature, like how different things synchronize and like being in a collective environment. And that's the scary part, because there's people who understand this in a profound way. And like in the last episode we talked about, well, at least I brought up the idea of rituals, and that this is as old as organized humanity, right? Like we are ritualistic people, and there's something powerful in like that creates cohesion or some sort of synchronicity again, and so and I think the people who are above, in the role, the people who can program the game, right? That's something Alison also talked about. That if you're making the rules, like that's the ultimate thing, to wield power. And so yeah, I guess that's just my last thought on that.
Yeah, and if the game is not set up with rules just where you're using sort of the behavioral psychology to sort of reward and punishment people and nudge them around, but if you can use a positive psychology where they think that there's actually that they're doing it on their own for themselves, and that they're in control and they're in the driver's seat, but they're actually just responding to more stimuli, that's the best. Right? Because then you don't have to worry about the external, like, some sort of social credit rewards. Like the person is motivated to participate in, basically, we'll just call it the cult, right? And at that point, it takes on a life of its own. My publisher told me, used a little analogy or anecdote one time about what was Elvis's manager's name? It was like the Colonel or something like that, right? And basically the story goes like this. You used to see the pictures of all the girls. Oh, Elvis, right? Well, the first time that happened, I've never actually looked into the history, but this is what my publisher tells me. And, I trust him on it. But the story is that the Colonel got there early and paid a few girls to scream and yell and swoon. The next time I think it was a 2-day concert or something. He says, Elvis is expecting Colonel to be out there paying girls again. He only had to do it once, because once he did it the first time, all the girls around him followed with the girls that were paid. And then once that was seen on a broadcast, everybody else, right, followed suit, right? It took on a life of its own, and people participated in it without any more money having to be paid out.
I guess I want to take, this might be a disagreement. Because for me, I do think that line from where this goes from something that's, okay, fine, that's what you want to do, to something that, remember, your paragraph you started off with was the World Economic Forum and this global world that's being created, and the institutions that are behind all that. And those include state institutions and private institutions. Public-private partnerships have been a lot of those words. So once you go from 6 people going into a room, synchronizing their heartbeat, fine, go ahead and do that. But once you bring in the infrastructure of Google, of Apple, of the US state, of World Economic Forum, of these institutions, and you say, oh, now this is an issue about big data analytics. Now this is about data collection. Now this is about social emotional learning for our computers. Now this is about development of AI. Then you are in a different ballgame. You're not in the world of, hey, we're doing the 6 of this to get our synchronize ourselves. You are building empire. And you are building the instrument of empire that, in my opinion, there's one empire that's trying to build up their big data analytics, and it's NATO and US, and there's another side, China and Russia. That's how I see it. And you can see them through the vaccines, you can see them through all that. So for me, the dividing line is very clear. It's when you bring tech in. Because if you're trying to do this and you just want to do it with 6 people or 60 people or 600 people in a place that's a stadium, fine, go ahead and do that. Have that as experience. And in fact, I would say, Jake, that the other line that where I maybe would counter what you're saying is when we talk about a fight and a collective fight against what's taking place, we know that part of this is going to be people having that experience for the first time of just an individual experience of fight back to a collective experience of fight back. And that experience is going to be like what you just described with the Colonel. That people who experience it in New Orleans, that story is going to be heard about it somewhere else, and they're going to do it in San Diego, and then they're going to do it in San Francisco, and people are going to. That's how it's going to go. And so part of me, it's a baby in the bathwater thing, because I do think there's something that has to be preserved in understanding that to stop what's going on, a collective fight is going to be waged. You are not going to be able to do this as an individual. It's not going to be cynicism, an individual cynicism, I'm just going to stay out, that's going to actually make this thing. We need to be cynical of them. But once that cynicism enters into, wait, about you all folks, what are you all doing? For me, I start to question, is that a road we want to go too far down? If that makes any sense.
I don't know if I'm following. So are you?
Meaning that,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
there's a way that, and I understand you're just describing your own personality, but I actually think when I think about solving these problems that you pose in that first paragraph that are going to be stopped, this ain't going to be stopped by individuals just saying, I won't. This is going to be stopped by groups of people saying, I'm going to do this instead, or I'm going to take your project on. And they're going to, in doing that, they are going to have an experience that's not unlike what people are attempting to have in these rooms where they synchronize their hearts, synchronize their minds. It's called a solidarity and struggle moment. It's what happens in struggle. I've experienced moments of that, brief, but I've experienced it. And it's something that you bring to yourself, but you do become part of a collective group in that fight. And so that's why, for me, I do draw the line at tech, not because it's tech, but because it is the master's tools, and the masters are using this tool to run their show. They're taking your attempt to synchronize yourself. I don't care whether it works. It shouldn't be done, because what it's really doing is it's providing information to our enemies to basically use against us, use against our children, use against our brothers and sisters in Latin America, in Russia, or wherever. So that's the reason it shouldn't be done, is because I don't give a shit whether it makes you feel like you're getting into a meditative state. In fact, you may get into a meditative state. It may help you do all those things you say you do in a room with just humans without a computer. But because the computer and the tech is there, that is where I draw the line, because now you are helping our enemies destroy us. So instead of collective experience being used to take down their project.
Right, but when you're talking about so you've had these what you call solidarity experiences in group settings, were you all we're going to meditate and get our heart rates in together?
It's a similar thing, but it's a similar thing.
Protest chanting, right?
I think it's
the union.
Yeah, you're right. So the whole go, even like at a team, right? Go team type. I mean, and that is sort of using the same sort of group psychology tactics and things like that. Okay, but again, so I'll use my own example of I use the church example. I'm not saying I never sang a song with the church, but it wasn't until after I vetted everything, was okay, we've been here a few times. I'm reading, I'm going through the hymn book. Okay, yes, this is theologically accurate. I'm not, I've been to churches where, I was scared to take the Eucharist because of some of the things that there was this is not biblical. What are we really doing here? I don't so again, I'm not saying that. There haven't been churches that I've been at where it was I made a conscious decision to yeah, this is right. This is cool. I'm on, we're on the same team basically, or whatever, but, I guess the reason I'm asking this and giving these examples is that I'm not suggesting that a group, some sort of group solidarity doesn't happen in any shape, and whether it be whatever, workers and students for choice, or churches or whatever. I'm suggesting that the order of operations is inverted here, whereas you create you get in that what we might call subconscious or unconscious state of solidarity, where you've built trust, right? And you're not okay, who are these people? What is this about? What's actually going on here? What are you trying to get me to do? What am I committing to? After you've built rapport and you've built trust by getting to know the people in the group, then you can go ahead and sort of don't want to say go autopilot, but right, all that extra sort of a level of awareness where you're sort of like, not sure and critical, you can sort of bring that down a little bit. But with sort of this heart math model, and this whole biofeedback, or even just without it, like you mentioned, some of the Jessica mentioned, like just sort of in retrospect thinking about some of the meditations in this together stuff, like what they're asking a lot of times in that situation is, let's get into a biorhythmic state of equilibrium together first, and then you can think about what you actually, whether, how much you want to commit to it or what it actually implies after. Let's not go through all of the, critical and conscious sort of analysis of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then we can go ahead and get in some kind of meditative state. It's the opposite. It's like, just go ahead and do this, and then end up on the other end somewhere, which at that point, you're on the other end of it. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that we're necessarily disagreeing, actually, but I would, to the extent that I'm clarifying that I'm not against some, being a part of a group, or, some sort of, group consciousness, that insofar as these technologies are concerned, if you're going to use them at all, which personally I'm not, it would have to be like with a group of people that I know, like that I can like trust in and out, back and forth, like that we have a very clear mission that we've agreed about. What is this mission or whatever, or this, this theology in the church, whatever it might be, right? What are we actually meditating on, or what do we have solidarity around before I go and sort of, shut that part of my brain off. That's
I feel like you're describing like the lead up to like ayahuasca ceremony or something, and that like pilgrimage like into the forest, and you give your consent and your whatever. I mean, I haven't done it, but like, your intention, and it's like skip that or make that like manipulative and coercive through tech or whatever, and suddenly like it becomes a whole different thing.
That's not a bad analogy, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about. Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. No.
I'm just gonna kind of throw out. I don't know. I don't really think this, but just like reading your article, right? Like the sort of realist in me, listening to Hubbard and her cronies, arguing that like, oh, we're gonna like create this, like the planet's gonna grow this. What does she call it? The nervous system, right? Like this whole new global nervous system, and it's going to happen through social media and all this stuff. And part of me is like, I can't get like a fucking photo to transfer through AirDrop from a device like 2 feet away from my computer, right? Like fuck off. Okay, central nervous system for the planet, like whatever. But then I don't know, like I think about these types of experiences that we're describing, and a lot of times like we're framing them spiritually, and then in the new age world they're framed spiritually. But I think like Andy said, like the experience of sort of physical real-time solidarity, like there's other similar experiences that maybe aren't like overtly spiritual for everybody, especially people who are more atheists or agnostics or whatever. But I don't want to like underplay the power of those experiences, even in a sort of like transcendent way. And I such a half-baked thought, because I don't really know like where like the idea of transcendence suddenly like slips into like a whole ideology of transhumanism or whatever. But like I'm very haunted by Allison when she talked about like human batteries and all of that, and I'm just thinking like yeah, it's very obvious that with things like the Heart Sync app and these institutions and on all the different ways that they're trying to control people, like it's very obvious certain things that they're trying to, like they want the data, right? They want sort of psychological control, like blah blah, all the things that we've described. But there is a little part of me that's like, maybe there is like something more to it, you know, on like, I don't know what that, I think all of us have kind of struggled to describe, like, what is that thing that is cultivated? Like they call it like collective Christ consciousness or whatever, solidarity, I don't know, like je ne sais quoi, call it energy, call it frequency, like, I don't know. I mean, I personally feel like there is some sort of undeniable frequency for group experience, you know, whether through meditation or something else. And it's a little freaky to think like, what do these people know? Like, do they know more than I do about what that is? And yeah, I mean, is there more than even just like the 4IR stuff that we're always talking about? I don't know. This is a little cuckoo, but I just hear Allison talking about the batteries.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, so, I mean, one way, so you sort of alluded that, you know, we can sort of talk about the same thing that you're sort of dancing around. We can talk about it in terms of maybe something spiritual or maybe something psychological if you don't believe in sort of the spiritual, metaphysical, transcendent, right? But a good illustration of that would basically be something like, so, you know, we sort of referred to some of this syncretist and sort of approaches to this new age stuff in sort of like a, oh, I guess you might call it like the term that was used was, you know, like a neo-paganism, right? And so basically, instead of attributing sort of all of the archetypes of the human personality to like gods and goddesses, you know, god of war, god of love, etc., right? Carl Jung basically took that and just said, well, those are archetypes of the mind, of the psyche, right? And then, you know, I guess other, you know, evolutionary biologists would have reasons as to why we develop those and things like that. But for, you know, you could think about this in terms of like a Jungian psychology, or you could think about it in terms of sort of like a Gnostic spirituality where there's sort of these outside forces. But one way or another, right, we're still talking about sort of these archetypes that have some sort of real effect on how we interact with other people, right? And like, you know, psychological, physiological, social, right? And so one way or another, you know, whether you want to call them archetypes of the psyche or archetypes of sort of the, you know, the metaphysical nature of the spiritual universe, you know, we're both in both situations. You're sort of positing them as something that is not tangible and not sort of reducible to biometrics or psychometrics, although maybe you can infer them, you know, or they would argue you can infer them through these wearables. But, you know, so they're real things, regardless of how you want to talk about them. And in some ways, and I think this is sort of the genius behind, you know, you sort of incorporating the human potential movement, Maslowian psychology, into sort of the new age, more occult dimensions of you know what is called the broader new age, right? Some of the Gnostic stuff, because you can come at it from whatever angle you want, right? Like you could still be on sort of the new age team. You can believe that it's some spiritual energy. You can believe that it's some subconscious frequency of your brain waves or whatever. But you're pretty much talking about the same thing with different sort of, you know, a different lexicon, which, you know, gets us back to what is the new age? Well, it is this very sort of, you know, all-encompassing spiritual psychological movement. And yeah, so you know, I don't know that for them you actually have to define what it is, as long as you are bringing your frequencies in sort of harmony with the broader movement.
There's so much here. I want to go back a little bit to what you said, Lipson and Jessica, you know, in terms of like, you know, I do think that, you know, in order to, because I do think that the world needs, you know, to change, right? Like in some way, like the things are heading, what our current, you know, the way things are, you know, it's a lot of unhappiness, a lot of, you know, satisfaction. We talked about market shaping, right, with Allison, and you know, and I do believe in the power of connection, right? In coming together, and that there are things that the people who are creating these technologies or attempting to wield this power think they know. I don't care how much fucking science they don't know everything. So that's what I call the spiritual part, right? That things that I can explain, you just know they feel they work. And people have different experiences, right, to different degrees. And even the problem here, right, is and I want to live in a society where you're free to do whatever the hell you want, like in your material experience, you don't have to suffer more. Obviously there's always cost and sacrifice. Nothing is perfect, at least in my view. I don't believe in this utopian world, and you will have to do things you don't want to do at times, but it's whether you have a high degree of freedom to choose to do whatever you want. And I want a society, right, a community, because I know that power, the healing power, the because it's evolution too. Thousands of years, coming together and organizing for safety, for for feeling good in so many ways. And we've been programmed, by not nature, but and at least that's my understanding. The problem is, who's wielding that power, right? Who's the mediator of that power? And obviously, I do draw a line, just like Lipson, about technology, right? And I am not saying that, and what I'm saying is, like, these people, the people who are behind all this, know for a fact there is something powerful here, and they're trying to wield this. And yes, the more we subject ourselves to these systems, right, these hard whatever thing, the more control we lose of our individuals, and the more control we lose of the potential of coming together and creating the society that we want as free individuals. And so that is the scary part, and that, I guess that was the question I had, whether the people who bankroll people like Barbara, Hubbard, like, they actually believe, and and I'm sure some do, but I think more than anything, the people who are at the top know what power, how to wield, or at least they want to wield power, because yes, of course, it's about capitalism, but there is something about power, right, that is fundamental, that is translated through, ultimately about controlling and shaping the world and playing God, and so, the reason I am an anti-capitalist and I hate capitalism is because it enhances the worst parts of being human, right? I'm not this utopian person either about humanity. We're capable of doing good things and bad things. That's in part why I hate when people want to infantilize indigenous people. No, they were fucking empires too. They also conquered people. Same with African people. They also enslaved people. They sold people. They enslaved their own people and sold it to Europeans for trade. A lot of people ignore this about history. So I'm not delusional in, like, what humanity. We're capable of good things and bad things. Like, it's about what set of circumstances create, a society that is more, welcoming and able to give us the ability to create something that's good for most people, for the majority. I'm also not going to pretend that it's going to be perfect, even if we get rid of capitalism, because that brings me to this culty thing, right? Like, and I think that's what I see here in this, new age thing that makes me uncomfortable. Just like it makes me uncomfortable to hear Marxists just regurgitate bullshit without really analyzing and finding the logical, consequential things. That's why it bothers me, the Marxists, not seeing the problems with the last 2 years, right? But I also know that in the name of Marxism, some horrific shit has happened. I am not gonna deny that. I'm not defending that fucking Marxism. I'm not an ideological Marxist. I try to follow logic, and so, I guess my point is just, I think I understand what Jake is trying to say, is that, I also want to come into a community. I don't want to just be part. I am just that person like Jake, that I'm like looking around. Why the fuck do I have to kneel down? Like, I'm just not just going to go along with it. I want to know why. That's who I am. I want to respect that. And in order for us to not repeat the mistakes that we've made historically as a society, we're going to have more people ask more goddamn questions and not defer to experts. Expert like Barbara, expert like the CDC fucker, who was lying to us this whole time, and that's the empowerment that I talk about, right? Like, but I do understand the power of coming together, but not blindly. That is the danger of this. And these technologies actually blind us more, because it takes our own intellect, our own ability to decide for ourselves out of our hands, right? Just like we talked about the medical system. And the people who are above Barbara, the people who bankroll her, who and at least that's my answer, I guess, that I've reached here, they know, they are wielding some shit. They're not just do this blindly, like, the rest of the people that are applying this thing mindlessly, and I'm not criticizing people, because at least my understanding of the world, I understand that we live, and that's why I want to change this goddamn world, because we live desperate lives, I don't know, like, I don't know, have the exact roadmap for for our world post-capitalism, right? Because that's what I still see here, a capitalist world of people who rule us, dictate how we live lives. We really have little choice from the place where we live, because, and that's what I see in that quote that you started with, that was, about you will own nothing and you'll be happy, right? In reality, what this is masking, right, is in the name of making us feel better, instead of getting rid of the bullshit that makes us live desperate lives, and cleaning up the world that it's been dirtied by people who are greedy. The worst kind of, the worst, really for me, like the worst examples of humans. Instead of creating communities where we don't have, or instead of living in desperate situations where we have to drive 2 hours to go to work, to be in a place that we don't have a choice in, and because we have to live, make a livelihood, because we can no longer go to the river because it's either polluted or it's enclosed. Instead of doing that, this is the solution that they're bringing to us, which is more disassociation from a sense of self, and that in turn is also useful, because keeping us separate, right? Not being able to see each other as humans, as a common experience, and also seeing that other people are feeling what you're feeling too, that other people are dissatisfied, and so all this is in play here with this. And so, yes, Barbara, she probably was a true believer, but the people that are scarier to me is not even just Barbara or the people who adhere to these systems. It's the people who are above them, who know how important this shit is, who know history, who know psychology, who know, and are willing to try to wield it, as much as they can, because especially in the context of the pillage that we're going through, we're like, shit is so expensive right now for everyone. We've been robbed for the last 2 years. We're being robbed currently with inflation. We've talked about it in this show. And these people who are pillaging everyone, the masses of people of the world, understand, the danger of people coming together, people, the synchronicity of things, and so in one way they're selling us, right? Like, oh, we want to create synchronism, but in reality is what they want to control, the synchronicity,
yeah,
of humanity. Because people will fed up, no one, like Franz Fanon said that quote on violence, right? Like, we revolt because we simply can't breathe. And they know this. And they want to ration everything. And that's why, like, it's scary to see, that how mindlessly a lot of us, masses of us, are joining this, allowing them to take more control over our lives, our individual psychology and health, in every part of us.
Yeah, after studying human potential movement and MLM, just listening to what you're talking about, that's something that both, much of, if not most of, capitalism in the modern era has in common with, a lot of sort of your what you might call your lockdown left, right? In the sense that, right, in the capitalist model, it's like, well, you can reach your full potential and your self-actualization if you make enough money and you buy all these these gadgets or this designer clothes or whatever. And then, in the, sort of the lockdown left type socialist people, right? It's the idea like, we're becoming better people because we have our masks on and we took our vaccines and we don't want to spread things. And so that means I'm a better person than, right, people that aren't. And so it's not just that, right. And in both, you're sort of, you're biting on whatever is sort of the marketing strategy, and your identity is wrapped up in, whether it be this individualist model or this collectivist model, but in both of them, right, one way or another, you're sort of, there's the illusion that you are somehow making your situation better for yourself by playing along with whichever team you're on.
Just one more thought on that, and the vaccines, and, this whole propaganda that was so scary, right? As we saw it unfold in front of our eyes, being those people that didn't stand up or kneel down when everyone else did. It's that, I'm not even mad, anymore, because I had feelings about the people like around me, right, who said they were about one thing and they were about the other. I'm not even mad that they fell for it, right? I'm upset and annoyed, and I have some sort of feelings because after the fact, right? When you in the moment, it's hard to see sometimes, right? When you're in the fucking wave of things. And the people who wield this propaganda knew this, right? They know propaganda, but what I'm mad about is that, there is no consequence. There is no, to their lies, and I'm mad and I'm scared because, here we are still being pillaged, and we are on our knees more than ever, and people don't even realize it. And that scares me, it scares me that we've given up so much power, in sense of ourselves, to something that doesn't have our best in their interests, and then not only that, but people that go against it are persecuted. But then I understand it because it's a fucking cult. It's a cult mentality.
And I should mention that I don't know if I didn't really get into it in the article, but if you do any sort of a study on human potential movement, literally it's not just tied to multi-level marketing strategies in the corporate world, but it's literally like played a role in like literal cults, right? So like the Nexium is one of them, and they use, I think it's EST. Earhart's, I always forget what the acronym means, but it's sort of a spin-off of human potential movement. But so Nexium is one. I want to say the Rajneeshis. I read an article where the Rajneeshis use similar human potential type psychology and things like that. But it's so you're using the word cult, and it's not much of a it's not a big jump to call it that. I think it's pretty accurate, actually.
Yeah, and I think Kenny, it was helpful to hear you say what you said, particularly. I want to come back to the question maybe I had for Jessica, but it was particularly helpful in light of what Jake, when Jake said, "Hey, wait a second, I want to be able to check this first before I go forward with it," and I somewhat heard within that like the doubt of being able to be part of that collective group, and I actually think you're right though that. It actually is, when we talk about collectivism that's actually going to be empowering, the question of choosing to be part of that and feeling like you actually can choose to be part of it or choose not to be, that it's the choice to be part of it and for that to be something that's actually really there as opposed to coercive stuff that makes you part of it. That is a critical piece of it that would have to be part of whatever we build. People have to choose to be part of it, and they have to make a conscious choice. And sometimes they're going to make a choice they haven't fully thought through, and then be like, "Okay, I'll do it." But that question of coercion is really important. So I think, Jake, I think I didn't quite hear that in what you were saying, but I think that is kind of what you're getting at when you said, "Hey, wait a second, I want to be able to look at this thing and decide whether I want to be part of it." And I do think that's an important part of any collective fight back. I guess the question, Jessica, I would have that I still think I wasn't were you somewhat asking if these people like Barbara Marx Hubbard and these people who have this idea of, because I think they are serious about thinking that that there is a neural network being built, and they might have acknowledged that, oh, it's not up to where it is, but we're going to get 5G and 6G, and we're going to get shit in your body, and then it'll be on, and yeah, they got plans to make us into electronic network using their phones and technology and creating cyborgs out of us. So I think that they're doing that. What I think, the question, I wasn't sure if I heard it right, was, come on, kids, let's go. See you, sweetie. Or are you saying that maybe there is something to that collective thing? Like maybe there could be something, if we could get the tech working properly, that this could be more collective somehow than in-person stuff? Was that the question you were kind of posing? Like, is there something more to it?
Well, I didn't mean like in a good way that they would harness that.
Yeah, okay.
I just meant like maybe it's more than the sort of concrete like the concrete products and outcomes.
Well, here's where I would say it is more, but it's more because we've talked about capitalism and profits and things like that, but that piece of capitalism that creates alienation and deep separation, like what they've done is their system has alienated us, and now they're going to go ahead and replace that alienation with this kind of fake collectivity. So in that regard, yes, it will feel like more, because they've made people feel so separated and so isolated and so not themselves in the first place, through basically turning us into machines, or making us think we're machines, making us think we're just little cogs in their wheel. So in a sense, but in terms of more, like actually more than being together in a room, like, no, like, I don't even think I need the studies to do that. I don't think I need to know anything to know that if the four of us were in an actual physical room together and having this discussion, it would feel different than what we're doing now. And now, okay, get enough wearables on you. I still will say no, like this is, and it's not just that it will feel different, but then once you put the wearables on, now you've invited your enemy into controlling that whole process. And that's why it can't be done there. Like, so I don't know. That's what I would say.
I don't know if you can see this very good. I'm trying to.
Oh yeah.
This is in the section on heart math in Birth 2012 and Beyond by Hubbard. Okay. And that picture that I just showed you, the dude with the chick or whatever it was, the person with a whatever that thing is, it's some kind of energy field. That graph is supposed to be what Jessica was saying about, it's like when you're meditating with other people, there does seem to be some sort of a vibration or energy field or something. There's something that happens that's not just isolated to your own psychology or your own mind. That there's something that's happening across, between the collective of the people that is, I don't know, I guess energetic. Okay, to use, to lack of a better term, and that's. In that part, that's what they're saying. There are studies that say that, and I don't know if that graph is what it actually, if they were able to graph it like that, but that was the basis for why they wanted to do the Global Coherence Initiative. So I just wanted to throw that out there, since it seems like that's what we're sort of touching on.
I heard, I don't know where, but this theory on vibrations and water and creation, and that they did this experiment in space where they play different musics to like water droplets, and they reacted different. Well, the cello, which resembles the human voice, created a different sort of reaction, to that water droplet. And so, like I do think there is something that goes beyond, because we are, energy and stuff, and it does sound new agey, and but some stuff that that we don't fully understand, but we know it works. We know that it's there, but and I do think these people, everything we know, we know what DARPA, what all these insidious institutions, capitalist institutions, they don't. We've said this in the show. I think Lipson, you said that they don't leave no stone unturned. And they will look at everything, and I'm not surprised, that all this shit is in play now, and it's actually becoming functional in terms of being mediators between ourselves and our experience.
So what you touched on, I think that the field is called cymatics, where you basically study the geometric shapes that water takes when certain frequencies are run through it, whether they be sound waves or electrical waves or whatever. And this relates back to something that I've talked about in the past I believe on this show, and I've talked about it on several different shows. I know that, and that is the idea of sacred geometry. And that is what both the technocratic, bio-eugenic transhumanists have in common with the New Agers who believe in conscious evolution. And that's why, as I was sort of talking about before the show, right, you might think of, okay, so the New Agers into nature, and they're not into science and technology. They're into like holistic medicine and herbs, not into like pharmacology and all that heavy stuff, right? And they're sort of two different, sort of far apart, right? But what they both have in common is ultimately the mastery of geometry. So, right, if we're talking about biochemical evolution, right, we're talking about the geometric shapes of your proteins and amino acids and stuff, and there's something called allotropy, which it's ultimately basically the shape of the different proteins that has them unlock biochemically and have metabolic reactions, etc. Right? I mean, that's why it's such a big deal when they figured out the structure of the double helix. Okay, and the same thing goes for biometrics, right? If you're doing like facial recognition scans, right? What if you ever seen one of the graphs, it's a bunch of triangles, right? It's an aggregate of different angles, right? If you're looking at the ECGs, I mean, you're still graphing it as they're either going to be angles and shapes, or they're going to be waves and they're going to be curved, right? And you could do this. So you could do the same thing with sound or energies, right? Whether that be that graph that you see on the TV or the computer when you have the wearable, right? Theoretically, looking at showing you this, I showed you this picture here where they have the person and then it's got the energy field, right? A similar wave is coming out, and it's either going to be sort of a sharp angular wave or it's going to be a curved wave. And this gets to the curve and the angle, the square and the compass. This is all Masonic stuff, basically, right? So in the square and the compass, you have a G, and the G means several different things. It means gnosis, it means God, it means geometry, it also means generation. Okay, so the square is what you use to create angles, and the compass is what you use to create curved lines. With that, you can basically graph anything in terms of architecture and engineering, but you could also go down to the molecular scale and you can look at how molecules form biochemically, how the biochemical processes relate to the evolution of life. And then you can also think of it in terms of what Barbara Marx Hubbard took from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, he was a Jesuit eugenicist priest, and he had this idea of the noosphere. And the noosphere is like the intelligence of the universe, right? It's some sort of energy or frequency. And basically it expresses itself in the pinnacle form at this point in time through the human intelligence. And when we finally merge, this is according to Hubbard, when we finally merge with our technologies, by using our intellect, we're able to create technologies, and then we're able to merge with the technologies. So then we're able to merge with the actual physical material universe. And this is the point at which the universe becomes fully conscious by that noosphere sort of planting a seed in our minds. Then we put it in the technology. Then we become the technology. Then it comes full circle. Okay, but so basically what, one way or another, what you're talking about is mastering, to go back to the square and compass. If you master geometry, you can achieve gnosis, which is just the higher form of consciousness. It's sort of an esoteric form of knowledge. And by achieving gnosis, you can generate your own reality, and you can become your own God. And that is the Gnostic narrative that's used. And I've talked about the Gnostic narrative as well. But this image is in my book. Okay, so in the Gnostic, this is Barbara Hubbard. This is her autobiography. It's The Hunger of Eve. So in the Gnostic narrative, they invert the traditional biblical story about what happened in the garden. And so the serpent, Lucifer, approaches Eve and says, why don't you eat this fruit? And she says, no, we can't do that because God says we'll die. He says, no. He's just saying that because he knows you'll become like him, meaning you'll become your own God. So look at what she has here. She's got an apple or a fruit. It's the hunger of Eve. And look what's inside of it. It's the universe. It's a bite taken out of it with the universe inside. Meaning, in their narrative, God is the villain, Lucifer is the hero, because God kept us in the prison. The garden was a prison, and Lucifer, through the fruit of the tree of knowledge, freed us from that prison. And so it's the knowledge of geometry that makes us our own gods, and we achieve that through transhumanism. And that's not just me saying that. That's Ray Kurzweil has said it. People like Yuval Noah Harari has said it. Homo Deus basically means God, man. Okay, and I mean that's the narrative that they have. Now, so this goes back to do they really believe in a Lucifer as like an entity, or is it just an archetype? I don't think it really matters, right? I'm going with the narrative where Lucifer is the bad guy. I mean, even to me, it's fundamentally inverting. To go back to the whole Jungian thing. Archetypally, we all have an idea of good and evil, or at least right and wrong in some degree, right? I mean, you're taking the fundamental archetype, whether it be psychological or a real spiritual entity, and then just going, yeah, no, that's the good one. I mean, it's basically it's the equivalent of saying good is bad and bad is good, and so I mean, I've been a Christian, but it's really studying these type of people that really made me get back into reading the Bible and stuff. And I know that's more of a negative reason than a sort of a proactive reason, but it just reinforces some of my roots. And so, anyways, that's.
Just want to add that picture with the apple. I think there's something metaphorical to the barcode that's right there in the middle.
That's on there. I didn't think someone else stuck that, but yeah, that's germane for our discussion for sure.
It's true. Jessica, do you want to?
Oh, hold on. I mean, and then Apple, right? The Apple symbol is an apple with a bite taken out of it for the computer. So there you go. So sorry.
I know, that's crazy.
Why does everything come back to just occult and Freemasons and all of that? Go ahead, Andy. I didn't have any.
Well, I think for me, I think, Jake, what that does is answers the question. So there's always a question that, and I think Kenny kind of got at it earlier as well, which is, what is this? Is this their plan, or is this their pitch? Is this what they're trying to do, or is this their con that they're trying to do? And in some ways, if I listen to you carefully, or what I'm thinking you're saying is, of course, it's part of their con, but it's got it. You're saying this, that roughly this articulates a kind of belief system that our rulers that inhabit the minds of much of our rulers, and it's like you can find an individual ruler that doesn't exactly believe this, but by and large, what you're describing is the ideology of what I would call almost the capitalist class, or the ruling class, or the oligarchy, or the globalists, and so that I think you're saying no, this is what they believe. This is what's animating them. They think it will empower them to do this. Whether it can be done is not the point. Although I think as they're going to try, but you're saying these folks are intending to do this. And there'll be another piece of it that will have it be more like the con, because you can sell people this thing and make it seem like it's something good for them using it. But it is not all con. There's a piece of it, and in fact, you're saying a large part of it, that is very much their belief system made manifest.
Yeah, I know, 100%. I mean, again, if we want to call that somehow the new age in a broad term, right? As I just sort of illustrated with sort of two different tributaries, like you could come at it from a different angle, but ultimately, right, what that the end goal is to achieve some sort of godhood, right? Whether that be just for the elite, that small class, the super class, or whatever you want to call them, uh, and sort of, I guess, debate is to say that we'll all be gods together, right? And whether or not people believe that these people believe it's an entity or an archetype or it's just a mythology, or right, one way or another, they're all using the same language, they're all using the same routes to get there, and you know, so you right? We could talk about it as a political system. We could talk about it as an economic system. We could talk about it as a technological system. But what glues the three together and what drives them is the philosophy or the belief system behind it. And that is basically this new age Luciferian Gnosticism where we're going to become our own gods. And whether that be the superclass itself is going to become gods and they're going to lord over all of us, plebes, or, and then there's sort of some, bait and switch that, we'll all be gods, we'll all get to be, reach our human potential together. I don't know how that all works out at the end. I just know that that's the narrative, and you can literally see it in all their everything that they've written.
So, and I guess like that to me, so you just mentioned a bunch of people that say this similar things, right? And so then the question is are these, so again, like, are they part of, I know they believe, right? But like, are they tools in the process? Like, are these, like, I don't know if I make sense with that question, but.
So it sounds like, I want to say something, I want to mention something real quick, which is, you talked about imperialism earlier, right? And well, I mean, historically, empires, the head of the empire always called himself a god, right? I mean, so again, right? So there's a thread here where this idea of, what makes, we talked about the atrocities of historical capitalism. You've talked about the atrocities of historical communism, like Stalinism, et cetera, right? Like ultimately, like what's the thing that glues them together is imperialism, right? And as you mentioned, it's this dream or this vision that we're going to recreate or reimagine the world and society, to use the World Economic Forum's language, to create something new, basically in our own image. And you don't really hear of emperors crowning themselves gods anymore, although you hear these technocrats basically use that language. But it's a long historical arc, and that's what they all have in common. Now, to go back to your question, you just said something to the effect of, are they tools? It sounds like maybe also what you're asking is, like, do they really believe that it's for the better, or do they just believe that they know that they're basically coercing other people to go along with a system that doesn't benefit them? Right. Or the other question I think maybe I'm hearing in that is, are they aware that potentially that the outcome will be bad for them as well? Is it something like that, or?
I really don't know. I just have a question. Honestly, you're helping me think about the question, because I think it's all of that. Like, my first question was about like, like, do they want to be the gods, or like either serving the purpose of someone else trying to be the god?
Right. Yeah. I thought about that in a lot of different ways, and I don't know that I really have a clear answer. But I mean, I would, I have to, if I had to pick something, you just assume it, and not saying it, that I have a fully coherent and cohesive way of, asserting this, and that is that, I would guess that, and maybe it's a mix, but I would guess that at the very top, somebody like the Rockefeller family probably believes that they're going to be gods, and, gods have to have what makes something a god is dominion. Right, absolute dominion over some realm or creation. Well, in order to do that, you're going to have something to have dominion over. And, they already have dominion over all of the resources. The only thing left is the people. So I would guess that people like Rockefeller, believe that they're going to be gods and we won't be, right? Now, if we move down the sort of levels, someone like Hubbard, Hubbard had a lot of, her rhetoric sounds very, used love and light and all this type of stuff. And, there was people that I was contacted by somebody that did some workshops with her, like ran the workshops with her. And he wanted to be confidential. It was a really nice guy. And, he basically told me he didn't agree with everything, especially some of the stuff that she'd said about overpopulation and, how a large number of people need to, basically be out of the picture. But what I got from him was that, he said, yeah, I could see her basically as, like if someone asked her to upload her consciousness, like if she could have got a couple more years, and not that he knew, but he thought that based on what he knew about her that she would do that. But he felt like I guess the simple way to say it is it seemed like she had the best of intentions. It seemed like from his personal interaction with her that she believed that somehow this was the next step in our evolution, and that it's a necessity, and that that it would be ultimately good for everybody, or at least maybe to the extent that whoever that since we have to do this, that if people can't shift consciousness with it, then that's just sort of a necessary casualty. But as I my sort of rebuttal to that was, okay, like you can have the best of intentions and you can think that it's for the better of everybody, but the road to hell is paved in good intentions, to use a cliche. So your intentions don't quite matter, right? And so I would guess there's probably a range depending on where you're at in the pyramid, and like how much faith do you actually have in technology. And but I would think that, just looking historically at the Rockefeller family funding, Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics, which was, doing Nazi eugenics stuff, right? These people have very little moral scruples, right? And I know that, David Jr. is not, John D. the Third or whatever, but, you don't stay in, you don't amass that fortune and then still have an inordinate influence on geopolitics for over a century by changing, by all of a sudden growing a moral compass, right? So I don't know. That's sort of how I'd wager. Now, I guess we also suggested, like, do they not think that this won't backfire, that it won't turn out, that they won't be on it won't be bad for them as well. Right. I think that's a necessary wager that it's just something that they have to, it's a risk they have to take. Right. And Hubbard, in her book, she repeatedly talks about, one of the books is Our Crisis is a Birth. Oh, here it is. Okay. Yeah, Our Crisis is a Birth. And she goes through this whole thing about, and she does it in many of her books, but it's the idea that as consciousness evolves, we reach these inflection points, and there's a crisis that happens. And the crisis is a moment where we either are going to shift and evolve or destroy ourselves. And so for her, it's like, well, we're already at the crisis. Now we just got to push through, and we gotta evolve to the next level. Otherwise, we're going to be overpopulated, and wars are going to ravage the earth, and blah, 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 blah. So, at one level, it's like, I guess not only do they think it's a risk that's worth taking in order to achieve the next stage of evolution, I guess they also believe that it's a risk that's unavoidable. Right? And in that is some sort of, that's, I guess, if they have any sort of moral justification, that, I guess that's what drives them. But I would just come back to the whole thing that's in the Bible at the beginning, which is that what is the serpent, Lucifer, says, hey, why don't you eat this so you can become a god? And Eve says, no, because God says we'll die if we do that. It seems to also suggest that another way to read it is that the pursuit of godhood, or the attempt to become your own god, can only result in your death, right? Whether that just be right in your own spiritual moral walk, or in the collective evolution of humanity, right? And we talk about not just transhumanism but post-humanism. There's only one other way that we use the root to that word, and that's when we say posthumous or posthumous, meaning dead. So it's almost like, again, it's like it's a risk that's worth taking, but then you have to wonder if there's another sort of division or branch of these people that for lack of a better terms, basically is like a death cult, has a death wish, and like you know what I mean, like in there's a space trilogy by C.S. Lewis, and it's really interesting. I won't digress too much, but like the head bad guy, we'll just call him, basically he calls it shaving and cleaning the universe, and what that means is to get rid of all organic life. Right. And like to him, he's like, that's like taking a shave, right? You got all this like stuff growing on you. It's, but you want to be clean, right? So you want to get rid of it all. So it's like, at sort of the pinnacle of this sort of transhuman evolution where we merge with computers, like, are we just computers, right? Like, is there any, like, at some point, I guess, you're like a Cable and X-Men, and you got like a eyeball and a glove or something, but at some point, maybe that's the end result that some of them want, is basically just to be done with the human species as it is.
Jessica, do you want to weigh in on anything, or do you want final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just continue to be astounded at the arrogance of people like Hubbard, like good intentions, bad intentions, whatever, like just with this whole pursuit of godhood. And I find it especially gross because it seems like, I mean, I don't know anything really beyond what I read in your article, Jake, but that she's often kind of framed as like the sort of like midwife of the new age. I think that was like Marianne Williamson or someone who called her that on the book cover in your article. So it's like this weird, like making it like warm and maternal, but so much of the whole God premise is.
Yeah, that's right. Marianne Williamson is buddies with her. And
yeah, of course. But yeah, like just this idea that like just their disdain for the human animal body, like the creature condition or whatever, and the arrogance that like they think they can do better than like your real central nervous system, which we don't even understand, like the full miracles of the body. Like, you think you can do better than like our natural immune system, our like ecosystem, right? Like none of these think tanks and foundations, like none of them ever have like a real actual environmental sustainability plan. Like all this tech and shit, like that's always just like left out or just like painted over with greenwashing. But yeah, it's just like they hate like real embodiment.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, you don't even have to like. I always say like, okay, like maybe you don't believe in God or anything spiritual, okay? Like, then you should be even more concerned about people that want to become gods, right? If you believe in God, then it's you're trying to become this this ultimate entity, right? Omniscient, omnipresent. I guess not omnibenevolent, but right, this all powerful being, right? But if you don't believe in God, then you're trying to basically become some sort of fictitious, creation in thought in your own mind. But I mean, like anybody whatever the improvements they want to sell us on, whatever it be, you get to, calm yourself down with the wearable, or, the brain chip maybe has some medical uses for people with seizures and things like that. Okay, let's we could talk about these and as what they do for particular issues. The minute someone starts trying to sell these things on you and then we'll become gods, I'm pretty sure that should be a red flag, right? I mean, and I got new agey friends that have says yeah, we're all gods, we can all create. I'm like, dude, you can hardly pay your bills, man. You know what I mean? I get sort of the analogy you're trying to make, right? But at this, it was kind of going into the realm of equivocation fallacy there, right? And let's just get the human thing down right first, right? I'm not saying that I'm open to talking about God stuff later, but like you just said, can we just figure out how to get the natural immune system to work with diet and exercise and things before we go using synthetic RNA and things like that? Can we get the human thing down right first? And I remember Kenny said something in the past, probably a couple times, right? It was emphasizing sort of this, in transhumanism, this push to do away with everything that's flawed in the human creature, right? And basically, I mean, this is something that's sort of fundamental to the human potential movement, right? Again, Maslow thought of these ideas in terms of well, we can't just constantly focus on our flaws. We got to focus on something that's good about us, right? And but it's part of the same dialectic ultimately, right? Because there's no humility in it. There's never a part where you just accept yeah, I mean, I get irritated sometimes, I'm impetuous. I put my foot in my mouth sometimes, or, I eat too much chocolate occasionally. I have an extra beer, whatever it is, right? There's never a point where it's just this is good enough, right? This is good enough. We'll just have grace for each other and we'll be humans and sort of try to, do that, and so that whole push towards evolution, towards human potential. I mean, it's and this is why I was sort of earlier suggesting that, well, what are the values that we're evolving towards, or what are the values that are at the top of the potential? Because if we don't get that clear, and if they're not something that's archetypal, either from God or just from nature, or that's something objective that we can all experience and agree to, you leave it open to, sort of, this whole transhumanist movement and all these other corporate government movements. And at the end of the day, you're not actually moving towards something. You're really just constantly moving away from the flaws, right? It's sort of, it's very, the term is transhuman, but it's very anti-human. It's very much about constantly not being satisfied with whatever flaws we have as humans, and trying to perfect that through these technologies, right? And so, yeah,
I'm always laugh reading these things, because it's if you want to overcome the physical lack of this species, why don't you take fluoride out of the water, or work on obesity or something? There's ways to direct your energy, but no, it's you gotta fucking upload your consciousness to the cloud.
I should just note real quick, I mean, since we sort of touched on it, so Hubbard was funded by Lawrence Rockefeller, who was one of the four Rockefeller brothers. His brothers, John D. III, I think Winthrop and Nelson were the others. And he funded her, but he also had a venture capital firm called Venrock. It was originally called Rockefeller Brothers Inc., but now it's called Venrock. And one of the things that they funded was a company called Sirna Therapeutics. Sirna is spelled Sirna, and they were developing, I don't know if they still exist, but at least at some point, they were developing, quote, RNA interference technology. Okay? So, I mean, I'm not saying that that's exactly what they're using at Moderna and Pfizer, but they were, he was funding some of the early developments in terms of synthetic RNA technology. So,
Well, I mean, gene editing is like fundamental to all of this. So
Yes.
Oh,
depends.
yeah, and then there's several other, what is it? So he funded Unity Biotechnology, Element Biosciences, Regenx Bio, 10x Genomics, Targeted Genetics, the Genetics Institute, and then some of these companies are owned by or connected to some of the big pharma companies that were been working on the jabbies. So Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, two of them. So.
Kenny, it seemed like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, well, Jake stole my shit, but
But
about action and things like that. But I mean, this is one of the reasons that I'm an adamant enemy of capitalism. Because it's constantly has to revolutionize, right? That's something Marx said. Like, shit keep moving. Tell us more. It's never less. It's never less. It's always more. Something different. And it's obviously different than. I'm also don't want to romanticize the feudal order, which we've talked about, right? Like how this process is weirdly like coming full circle into that time, like a techno-feudal order of things, and so I'm not romanticizing that either, which seems that's what I hear in that quote, right? You won't own nothing and you'll be happy. I don't buy that either. Like when I talked about, going back to fundamentals, right? Like I don't talk about going back to a feudal order or slavery or something more human, right? Like something more basic. And and it will take some modernity, right? It will, like not everyone's gonna give up everything, and that's a puzzle for me, right? What I do know is that the people that are ruling, that are selling us these lies, this constant dissatisfaction, desperation, and control over our lives. What I do know for a fact is that I don't want to follow them. Because what I see is a cliff, at the end of all this. And we've talked about world war, and there may be disagreements in some ways, but all I know is that I don't want to follow them. I don't want them to decide for me. I don't want them to keep giving me more misery, because that's all I see, by and large. And I do see the resilience of humans, in things. We are adaptable, and yes, like I also think like they think they have control of things, and it will backfire. That's my hope, at least. That's why I believe in revolution. What shape takes afterwards? Well, we have to learn our lessons. We have to learn our lessons about following cults, following blindly. Also that's why I believe in power spread over a bunch of people, not over a few people, because we'll end up in the same shit. Call it whatever fucking system you want, and I don't want that. That's what I call myself, a socialist communist, but not state dictation, not the people, not what really most Marxist social people that claim socialism think that socialism is state owning everything and just partitioning that out to you. That's not the world I envision. The world envisions a world, organizing, created, and run collectively, and by individuals who are free to do whatever the fuck they want. Obviously there's problems. There will be problems. I don't have the exact roadmap. What I do know is that I don't want this shit. Whether it's called communism, because I lived in fucking Nicaragua, who calls themselves Christians, revolutionary socialists. They're fucking not. I was close to the, people in power, and so like, I guess I do in some ways, ironically, I'm asking for people to become their, like, what do you call, come in control of their own lives, their own thoughts, their own ideas, and also expose them, because that's what I do is, right? Like this show, that's why I talk to people. That's why we have to talk to people, because sometimes our own shit is crazy and wrong, in I do believe in a collective, kind of synthesis of knowledge, in accountability if it is collective, and so again, that's why I hate capitalism. That's why I see, things. I think I have a degree of understanding of power and how corruptive it is, for any human. like, like it's intoxicating. And again, I personally, that's what I work towards. That's what I do this show. This is what I talk to you. This is why I expose myself to ideas that I'm not supposed to. This is why I think outside the culty, and I, and that is, I guess, my contribution. And I just urge people to have confidence to have an opinion, to think, to discuss, and not to defer to experts that might be in a fucking cult, and not even know it because they have good intentions. So I was reading this article about people that go to the Hamptons and they're injecting themselves with Botox in the bladder so they can withstand the drive to the Hamptons because traffic is becoming really bad. So like, I don't want to be that kind of person, like, because the next step to me is like they're going to genetically modify themselves to not pee, right? Because it's an inconvenience. And like, I don't want to live in that world. Like, I'll piss if I have to piss anywhere. So.
Can you believe that people used to urinate back in the day? I mean, talk about a backward species. I mean, what were they thinking?
On that note, well, Jake, thank you very much for coming back. It's been a while, so it's good to have you back. Hopefully, maybe 3 or 4 weeks from now, we'll do something else. I know you're going to do a second part to follow up this article and talk about sort of the connection. People had misgivings about, oh, maybe these people mean well. You're going to talk about their connections to, what was it, pedophilia rings and...
Yeah, the Malthusian stuff.
Oh, yeah, like Malthusian stuff. Yeah, eugenics. And so, and I know that the person, anyway, I don't want to get into it, but we should get done. Anyway, thank you, Jake, for being here and for sharing this.
Yes, sir.
So that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel, Challenge the Mainstream Left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes, wherever you found this blog, and we'll have Jake's episode or Jake's article on the notes below. You can reach our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com, and you can find past episodes to the podcast channel there and connect with us. I remind people, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our 8 platforms or 9 platforms on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. And if you'd have any comments you want to make or anything you want to share with us, please do so and put it below in the episode. So for Andy and Jessica and Kenny and Jake, again, thank you for being here. That's it for this week, and we'll see what we have to bring you next week.
I've got half a mind to like buy an old Nintendo emulator and just sit around and play video games from when I was like in grade school for like a month straight and just check out from all this heavy reading, writing, speaking, recording, interviewing, teaching, grading.
I recommend it. I've been playing some video games myself, actually, like that are kind of connected to childhood stuff that I used to play. So I can see that I'm trying to revert backwards.
I was going to ask you all that. Well, I know we're getting off topic. This is not,
oh my God,
I edit this, but I was like, I wonder how many other people, because it's just the way the world has gone in the last few years, like are having this experience where they're like wanting to relive these childhood things. They want to go back in time and get out of this new normal that we're going to talk about in a minute here.
What would you say, Jessica or Kenny? I'm curious.
Well, I think overall that's totally true, but it is we should do a video game episode sometime because I would love to hear everybody's like stance, because I fucking hate them. Like I hate video games, like on a soul level. But I don't know. Sometimes it's like hard to justify that position. My partner loves them, but
you said you were awesome at Tetris, though. That's the one exception.
No, that's like a computer game.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it was originally. It was my experience with it comes off.
And I don't know that I would say I enjoy it. I used to be really good, like really good at it. But when you're like playing it all the time, it messes with your brain.
Mm.
I can see how it's a slippery slope to get from there to,
Yeah, I used to go to, if I played it long enough, I would go to bed at night. When I closed my eyes, I was still.
You'll see them. It's yeah, next stop, Barbara Hubbard. So
Right.
For me, I had a different experience growing up because I was in Central America, and getting access to technology was harder. So my relationship with technology started later in life, and like I've never been like the best gamer, but once I got a handle of technology, it took a grip of me, and but going back for me means going to play soccer on the street with my friends, or building some shit with like a skateboard and like going down the hill and running into cargo boxes.
Have you had any urges to skateboard or play soccer recently?
Oh yeah, I mean, like just be active, and like interacting with people. I think that's my craving, and barbecuing. That's kind of what I crave. And like I don't have a console anymore, so I don't really do it. But I want to get my phone.
Add that to the list, Jessica. Video game episode.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Where was I? All right.
To the Metaverse. We should get a VR set and go.
Oh, God. Then Jessica will be right. So I plan on defending.
I don't go past the Nintendo 8-bit or maybe a little bit of Super Nintendo. That's it. I'm done. I end after that.